joining us live from Ithaca, New York, home of Cornell University. I'm Chris Wofford, and on today's show, we've got Mike Hoffmann in studio to talk about climate change and how it's affecting our diverse and interwoven food system. Mike, great to have you in the studio. It's been a few years since I've seen you.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Last time we were chatting, it was deep COVID.
That's right.
We were in our houses. I just watched the video today.
This is nice.
Yeah, we were a lot younger back then.
You didn't have to bring that up, but let's go ahead.
Okay. Mike is faculty author of the Climate Change Leadership course, which is available online at eCornell. We'll share the URL for that. And is also author of a recent book publication called Our Changing Menu, Climate Change and the Foods We Love and Need, which is available at Cornell University Press. We'll share the URL for that. I asked Mike if he could offer a discount, and he gave us his top secret friends-only discount code.
And it's about 30%.
30%.
So it's a good discount.
Not bad. So when you go to that URL, if you want to check out the book, apply that discount code 09SAVE. That'll get you 30% off the book. A couple notes to our viewers. This event is being recorded. We are live right now. It'll be viewable at the same URL afterwards. So if you have to leave or you want to share with colleagues, this is the place to view the recording after today. You could submit questions in the chat. Mike and I have a lot to talk about, but I'm as much interested in what you have to say as what we are. So you may open the chat box by clicking the dialog box at the top right of your video player. You'll see it right up there. We'll also be asking you a few poll questions, so get your phones ready because we're going to shoot some QR codes in just a minute here. So you may launch the poll questions by shooting this QR code that's going to be up on your screen with your smartphone. We'll ask you a couple questions, word cloud, multiple choice kind of things. Won't be too painful. Throughout our discussion, we'll be sharing URLs, just like I mentioned, the book, courses, etc., in addition to some reports and several downloadables. So heads up for those. You'll see those URLs in the chat. If you happen to be watching the archived recording, however, those links will then be available in the overview section just below the video player here because the chat doesn't preserve into the future. So that's how we do this. Let's get into the poll question, Mike. I want to understand where people are joining us from.
Okay.
Invariably, we have an international audience here. It'll be cool to see
Sounds great.
what the mix is going to look like. So, audience, where are you joining us from? A lot of what we're going to be talking about today is, has to do with local, domestic concerns, but we're talking about a global issue here, and I think everybody probably understands that as we get into this. I was going to ask you, I was reading in the intro to your book, you had started out as a farmer. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in central Wisconsin on a dairy farm. We had one cow. I assume that qualifies as a dairy farm, but
yeah.
But
was it a legacy family farm that went back?
No, not really.
Okay.
Just my dad bought it at some point, and it's very small.
Yeah.
But today it might be called a hobby farm. But back then it was where most of our vegetables came from. The milk went in the house. Mom made butter.
Yeah.
So it was I think, a very special way to grow up,
and
close to the land.
Yeah, and a lot of the percentage of farmers among Americans was way bigger than what it is now. Now we're down at 1% of us or something like that.
Yeah, I think in one way, 1 out of 75 employed people in the U.S. is a farmer or rancher.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Good stat. Okay, New York's represent real strong. We have mostly people from here, Trinidad and Tobago. Where else internationally? Well, Georgia, I don't know if that's the same as GA, but there you go. So mostly domestic audience, Mike, which is interesting. So maybe that'll help us tune our conversation. New York showing up strong. Let's go to the next poll question here. This is kind of a weird one, but in one word, how does the concept of climate change strike you? When you hear climate change, is there a word that you can use to describe either viscerally how you're feeling about it, or what kind of intellectual response it elicits in you? And I think you may know where we're going with this because we all understand climate change to be something that we have to face whether we like it or not. Horrified, worrisome, DC, just checking back in to make sure we understand that they're from the District of Columbia. Concerned, okay, this is probably where this is going to go. Sad, nobody's saying I'm inspired or I accept the challenge necessarily quite yet. So sad, worrisome. So yeah, these are generally
right. This is what we often
pessimistic
see.
responses.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good little exercise. Hopefully we can flip and turn some of this into positive thinking. Ideally,
I hope so.
That's part of our mission here. So one more. What kind of information would help you as an individual help to take part in tackling the challenge of climate change. Why are we asking this one here? Have you found in your studies that that people are either generally, in the writing of the book and so on, that people you know, are a little anxious about being underinformed, or they think it's too politically divisive of an issue to you know, to bring
Say
up with people?
both of those.
Both of those?
But
Yeah.
without giving the answer away, it's pretty much people want to know, what can I do?
Yeah.
That's, you know,
And there we go, right? So guidelines on how to be more responsible consumer and active citizen
Exactly.
are far and away the leading type of information, tip of advice on how to have productive conversations about it. More information about causes and impacts. People don't seem to need more science necessarily, right? It's about how to behave on an individual level, I think, is where
And collectively, individually and collectively.
Good. All right, that's encouraging. We'll settle on that 67% and move forward.
That's good. Good to see.
All right, so Mike, let's set the table a little bit. You're an emeritus professor at Cornell from the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. 32 years over there. But your story goes way back. You know, you like we said, you began as a farmer. Then you got into science. How did that translate to your work at CALS, the Agriculture and Life Sciences College? And then how does that carry us to the book?
Sure. Well, I guess I've always been interested in science and the environment.
Yeah.
I just grew up with, you know, nature, so to speak. When you're on a farm, it's you live it.
Yeah.
And that led to a degree in ecology from University of Wisconsin, then another degree in entomology, but a focus on better ways to manage pests. So that's that environmental component. And the same thing with a PhD in California. So fundamental concern about food
Yeah.
and about the environment. And somewhere along the way, there was an aha moment about climate change. Like, this is a big one. And as I often say, anybody in a leadership role, which I had, you better be aware of that if you want to stay in business as a CEO.
Yeah.
Or in an institution like Cornell, you better make it top priority.
Yeah.
And maybe that happened 12, 15 years ago, but that was sort of the turning point for me.
And for clarity, you were not a lecturing faculty or a research professor. You worked in extension.
Right.
And you were working directly with farmers all around us here in New York.
Exactly. Yeah, as an entomologist, I was there to help them manage pests better.
Yeah.
With something called integrated pest management.
Yeah.
And I continue now. It's pretty much telling the climate change gospel to farmers too.
Yeah.
These are the things we can all be doing.
Great, good. Okay, let's get right into it. We need a brief refresher on climate change. Let's talk about what's going on from your perspective, from where you sit, Mike.
Sure. I think this image, the orange band depicted on the image, tells it all.
What are we seeing exactly in this image?
That orange band is the layer in which we live in.
Uh-huh.
And it ranges from 3 miles high to 11.
Yeah.
Average about 8. That's it. You know, most people think, well, greenhouse gases, whatever, they just go up, but they don't. I mean, that layer is where storms occur, the clouds form, the weather occurs, and what happens is solar radiation comes down, hits the surface of the earth, warms it. Like if you put your hand over a dark car, black car, on a hot day, you can feel that heat.
Sure.
It's not hot air. It's actually radiant energy going up from that surface. That goes up, encounters greenhouse gases. They absorb it and re-radiate it in all directions.
Sure, yeah.
So we had just the right amount of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere for a long time. But now we've had a lot more. So that whole effect is sort of multiplied over and over and over. So that radiation now comes back. More of that heat is captured. The globe is warming. That's global warming.
There's a picture in the book here where you liken the thickness of the area that we inhabit as the peel of an apple.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Right.
The peel is really thin.
And fragile.
That's where we live.
Ultimately.
But the rest of that story is, so we have the globe is warming. That creates climate change. And when you think of climate change, that's a 30-year period.
Yeah.
It's not just like a cold winter. And weather is what's happening outside today or maybe over the last few months.
Sure.
So Ithaca, I've been here 32 years, winters are warmer. The climate in Ithaca has changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could just feel it anecdotally. And then you look at the data and it's pretty striking. We were talking about all the dynamics of farming around here.
Right.
Springtime, fall, harvest, everything is different.
Yes, right.
Massive droughts in the summers.
Yep.
Yeah. So for those who are tracking and actually looking at the data, there's some recent developments in climate change. Tell us about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. This is the big thing. Who accesses this report? Who is primarily concerned with this? This is something that just came out in March, I think.
It's been out about a month.
Okay.
This is the big report. It's a compilation of several previous reports, so it kind of summarizes the state of the knowledge, the state of the world.
Yeah.
And, it's scientists, hundreds of scientists contribute to it. And some argue that it's not even pushing the agenda fast enough because there are biases in there, like some country doesn't want the word fossil fuel put in a certain location.
Yeah.
Because in the report. But it's the big one. And, this last report it's dire. We really have a problem. And when I say we, that's the big we.
There's a cause.
Homo sapiens and,
Yeah.
you name it.
Right.
But they also make it clear that we have time, or we have an opportunity to make the changes. Without any doubt, humans are the cause. Some of the key points.
Yeah.
It's going to get worse if we stay on this track. Even just a small increment, like half a degree, is a big deal of warming. So we want to avoid that. It's getting more difficult to address the challenge. And there's these things called tipping points that don't fit the models, but like
What about
melting.
the Doomsday Glacier? You would.
Well, that's one, but let's just
Okay,
take the
all right.
melting northern latitudes. They're melting permafrost. As that melts, it releases greenhouse gases, which warm the atmosphere, which melt more permafrost.
Yeah.
It's like cutting a tree down. Once you see it start to fall, it's not coming back. They call it a tipping point. So those are the really pretty scary things. And the report basically says we have about 120 months, 10 years, to make huge changes. So we have-
120 months.
Well, I use the term, you can say 10 years,
Yeah.
but when you say 120 months,
Oh yeah, I froze up inside.
yeah. So it's call to action. There's a real sense of urgency that all of us around the world, especially in the rich countries, because we cause this problem,
Yeah.
need to really act.
And as you say before, there's evidence all around us, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about some examples
We can
here.
start with droughts.
Right.
I mean, we've heard about all the precipitation falling in California.
Yeah.
Great, but next year could be a drought.
Right.
The sort of flip-flop from drought to excessive rain is now the future. The Colorado River, for example, which supplies water and electricity for millions of people in the Southwest, it's still quite low. Floods. The image here, I believe, is from Houston a few years ago, where they had 50 inches of rain in a day, and more recently Fort Lauderdale, 25.
Yeah.
There's more humidity in the atmosphere, more energy, more downpours. And fires, it's hotter, it's drier. So this year, California's got all that moisture, for example, you're going to have a lot of vegetation. So if it shuts down and it's a very dry and hot summer, the risk of fires is there. You got all that material to burn. And then glaciers
Yeah.
and ice caps around the world. When I used to gave these talks like 10, 15 years ago, I said, Antarctica, don't worry about it. It's going to be stable for thousands of years.
Yeah.
No,
Nope.
it's starting to break up and melt, and
Sure
that leads
is.
to sea level rise.
Yeah.
This pictured here is something called the Doomsday Glacier,
Okay.
and it's a big one. If it goes and the ice behind it enters the oceans, it could raise sea level by 10 feet by the 2100.
Wow. Okay, so for some of us, this is nothing new, but at the same time, you always have to make the case that this is indeed dire, right? Any conversation should be preceded with that. These are the facts, this is the situation, this is how much time we have. This creates something that you describe, and this is a word that's kicked around, eco-anxiety, right?
Right.
And this is something that is particularly prevalent in younger generations. I was talking about my kids having a particular form of eco-anxiety. It's a real thing. It's
Sure.
It's something that sort of aligns with some of the terms that we saw pop out from the audience there.
Right.
Talk a little bit about it.
Well, basically, it's people are concerned about the world, and climate change being sort of top of the list. And there was a group out of the UK that did a survey, a global survey, a couple of years ago, and they found that 75% of those between the ages of 18 and 25, I think it's 25 or 26, 75% said their future is frightening.
And I may not have kids or...
Yeah, and 40% said, I'm
Yeah.
thinking twice about having children.
Yes.
But I also heard the author say, this is good. And I like, what? And it's because they know. They know something needs to be done.
Yeah.
They're not
The
ignoring it.
message is getting across.
So that was, sort of the flip side to that.
Sure, yeah.
Which was good.
Right.
Yeah, and I face this stuff. I tell people, don't doom scroll,
Yeah.
but I do that as my job.
That's how we
And
close
it's
out
really
our
a
day.
bummer.
Yeah. Okay. So eco-anxiety, that's something that's definitely going on. Okay. Let's get into your book a little bit because this leads us to what we're really talking about.
Sure.
We're talking about climate as it relates to food, food systems, individual behaviors. We'll get into some
Got
prescriptive
it.
methods presumably at some point. Talk about developing the book, who you worked with, why you did it, why you looked, kind of what led you to look at climate through food.
Well, I've given many, many talks on climate change,
Yeah.
and it seemed like whenever I mentioned food, the audience kind of leaned forward, like, not my coffee.
Right.
So there was a reaction
Coffee's
there, and
the
then all of a
favorite.
sudden it's like, and when you talk about climate change, it has to be relevant to people's lives. Okay, glaciers are melting. Well, I live in Missouri.
I don't know
worry
what
about
the
it.
Doomsday Glacier is, and I don't know where, what-
And you can talk about human health, you can talk about the economy, biodiversity, but when you get to food, we encounter it multiple times a day. It's part of our cultures, family histories. I don't know about you, but I get emotional over food.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's emotive. It's just like,
It's a big deal.
yeah.
Yep.
And some of those, as you mentioned earlier, some of your favorite wines, they're changing.
Yeah.
So it seemed logical to focus on food. And the idea of the menu just captures it all. You look at a menu and you can say everything's changing on the menu.
So
that-
from soup to nuts, as they
There you
say.
go. And the other authors, Danielle Eisman actually was a chef for a period of time in her career, so
Yeah.
kind of makes sense to have someone who's been a chef to work on a book
Sure.
that has menu in the title.
Yeah.
And the other individual, Carrie Kaplinka-Lair, a freelance writer that I've known for many years, she did the personal interviews in the book of people on the front line of climate change and really added a special dimension to the story.
The thing when I started digging into the book, I'm just getting going, but one of the takeaways that I got was that this has broad appeal, but it also it's relevant to people that are working in the food industries, and it gives us a sense of the things that they're going through.
Right.
Whether you're trying to, you're the purchasing manager at your restaurant, or you're a multinational conglomerate making food. You've got a lot to deal with.
It touches every part of the food business. That's again, just food seems to be the perfect messenger of the climate change story.
So you have it structured like a menu. Give us a couple examples of.
Well, let's
of
start
foods,
with
maybe you start wherever.
let's with our favorites.
What?
They're called social lubricants.
Okay, yeah, that's right. We start
Alcoholic
with the
beverages.
booze and the cocktails.
Well, it's like before dinner drinks all the way through to coffee and dessert.
Okay, let's start with
So
the
let's do.
aperitif.
I like the story about Scotch.
Okay, what's going on there?
So Scotch is aged essentially out of doors and out of door air temperatures because you want the Scotch to move in and out of the oak barrel to pick up the flavors and so on. But
Yeah.
today they lose 29 million gallons of Scotch by evaporation through the oak barrels.
How does that compare to historically?
That's still historical, more or
okay.
less. But
All right.
it's warming. Can you imagine how much more Scotch is going to be lost through those barrels as it warms more and more?
Were you able to quantify it in dollars and volume?
In the
you
literature,
gotta-
I found an article. They said
Yeah.
29 million gallons today. This time. No, I didn't try to. I did not try to calculate out what it would do, what it would be like in the future. But and they call that the angel's share.
Yeah.
Other examples would be sushi rice.
Uh-huh.
Where most of that's grown and were produced for U.S.
Where's
consumption?
most of the sushi?
99% in California.
Is it really?
And think of what's happening out there.
Okay.
So it's just, again, back to food. It's just where we need to be.
Yeah. I want to remind our audience to drop in questions at any time. I will be taking them. We'll see what's queued up here in just a moment. Sorry, let me just get my...
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
let me continue the menu story.
Yes.
So we got stuck on drinks.
Yeah, okay.
So let's move to salads.
Right.
You think of tomatoes, well, and because of increasing CO2 in the atmosphere, they will get sweeter. Onions a little more pungent. Salad, the greens, production of greens, now it's like Salinas Valley and some of those areas flooding in California. Actually, as winters warm, production will move and expand. So that's opportunities for growers in other locations. Avocados, they don't tolerate high temperatures, and the California production will decline about 40% in the next couple of decades. So, salads are being affected. But if you want to really dig into something that's changing, look at a bottle of salad dressing and all the ingredients. It's just fun to look at and find the different spices and herbs that are going to change.
Right.
Let's talk about the main course.
All right.
So the big question is, red meat.
Yeah.
And in general, we should work as best we can to shift to a plant-based diet. And the way we talk about red meat is it's okay to eat it, treat it as a delicacy, not a staple. That's what I do.
Yeah.
I will occasionally have a hamburger.
That's right.
But you can still eat it. You think of fish and seafood, that's changing too. The populations of fish are moving. The acidification of the oceans is affecting things. And with warming oceans, we may be eating more octopus and squid because they love warm conditions.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening in the oceans.
That's what
The main course. Sides, just think of grains. Nutritional quality is dropping in some of our grains like rice. The B vitamins will decline by 30% as CO2 goes up.
What about wheat and
Same thing.
Same deal?
Essential minerals will decline.
Oh.
But rice is the big one because there's several billion people around the planet that depend on it. So they're already maybe nutritionally challenged, so that's another one.
Sure.
But then finally, I don't want to talk about it, but coffee.
Yeah.
The prediction for that is it's going to be challenged, and by mid-century, about where it's grown today will be reduced by about half. In other words,
Over what time period?
the next 3 decades.
Oh, gosh.
No, it's okay. It'll be around.
Yeah. Well, this is something we talked about earlier, which was before the show, which is, this presents opportunities for coffee to be cultivated elsewhere. And this goes for any of these crops, really, right? They're moving further north and south, and that's the way it's going to go.
Right. Yeah, you can't, it doesn't, every time there's a challenge, there's an opportunity.
Sure.
But for coffee, for example, in Central America, it's facing challenges, but the growers are switching to cacao because it does well in the new conditions. And so they still have a living. They're just making cacao for our chocolate.
Sure.
And, there's another one, chocolate. There's a huge program partnering researchers in Costa Rica with those in the UK looking for better varieties, more resilient cacao for our chocolate.
When you were writing this book, all right, so we've taken ourselves, by the way, from apps to dessert, including our aperitifs, our cocktails. I want to switch a little bit. You had mentioned that the audience for this book is the rich world. What do you mean by that?
Well, simply put, those of us in the rich world, primarily the U.S., the main cause of climate change. And at the same time, we have the potential and the capacity to make a difference. So I think it's our responsibility to do that. That's why I'm referring to the rich world. This presentation isn't going to fit in Western Africa or someplace where right now they're facing a drought and looking for the next meal. It's our responsibility to do what we can to, in fact, make the changes that we need to benefit all the rest of the people on the planet.
Let's get into some science a little bit when we talk about some of the changes that are happening at the crop level to individual plants, some of the stressors that are being put on these coffee beans, for instance.
Right.
Right. So what are they dealing with, plants?
So the world of that small plant pictured there is changing. A plant needs the right temperature, water, soil, and air, specifically carbon dioxide. But every one of those things is changing. It also needs sunlight, but that's not changing. So the story behind carbon dioxide is really interesting because plants grow faster, yield higher, and people will make the claim, well, climate change is good because, look, it's going to benefit agriculture. But any gain there is pretty much going to be offset by more extreme weather. That's the consensus. But increasing CO2 does a lot of interesting things to that plant. As I mentioned, it affects foods and so on. But weeds actually become harder to control with higher CO2 levels.
Oh.
And actually they become better competitors. It has effects on various things, but that I'm kind of hitting the high points there, CO2. But when we look at temperature, yeah, we all agree that the atmosphere is warming. It's about 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it should be. But it's not that simple. So if winters are warming actually in the U.S. twice as fast as summers, and that's a concern because fruit and nut trees require a winter dormant period that is induced by cold temperatures. And without that, you get very few nuts and very few fruit. So peaches in Georgia were really hit hard in 2017 because the previous winter was too warm. They had 15% of normal production.
Well, that's not sustainable.
No.
Yep.
And pistachios in California about the same time, they lost several $100 million because of the same thing.
And the almonds are like the villain of the nut world. What's the deal with almonds? They take it's very intensive, a lot of water.
Right. They take a lot of water, but to defend the almond grower, they're also using the hulls to form mulch under the trees to hold that moisture. They're also using very precise irrigation techniques to minimize the use of water. But yeah, it's one of those that does consume a lot of water.
Can I ask you a tough question? This was something I was thinking about just kind of loosely before we started here, but should we be, I mean, you had mentioned red meat in moderation. Fine, great. But should we be like just out and out, like, for instance, knowing the tax that almonds put on the land, should we just be abstaining from eating those kind of foods, or how do we think about that?
I think the big one is red meat.
Okay.
Anything that
So
comes
in the
from
hierarchy
a
of things
ruminant
we should-
animal. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the big one. And again, you can eat it, just treat it as a delicacy, not a staple.
Sure.
And that includes mutton and the ruminants. But and then you can quickly see if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions from the various foods.
Yeah.
Red meat's right up there, mutton is up there.
Yeah.
But then when you switch to pork or chicken, they're not ruminant, they're not producing methane.
Yeah.
Then it's better, and then finally get down to vegetables, it's
Okay.
nothing
All right,
compared
comparatively
to red meat.
negligible.
Right.
Yeah, methane was a big thing. We had done, there's a whole methane consortium working group over at Cornell
Right.
that thinks nothing about methane, and that's the real target. That's the
Right,
thing we need to be
exactly.
focusing on.
Exactly. And there's a lot of research here, but also there's things like you can feed cattle garlic. It reduces methane emissions. Kelp
Oh,
is
yeah?
another one.
Oh.
And now there's some synthetic compounds that actually help reduce methane emissions from cows and dairy cows and
Let's talk
cattle.
about seafood a little bit. You had mentioned that there's going to be octopuses and squid will spike.
Right.
Get used to it. It's going to be a lot more available, and it'll be
Well, they love
affordable.
warm temperatures, and
Yeah.
there are areas of the world already where their populations are increasing as the ocean waters
Yeah.
increase. So and others are in general declining. The oceans are a challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
they're massive, and it's not just climate change, it's management, it's overfishing, and a variety of other things
Yeah.
that need to change to preserve our favorite seafood. And one part of the oceans also that not many people appreciate, their organisms are plants. They're phytoplankton that live in the upper layers of the ocean. And basically, they're like plants on the land. They produce half the oxygen we need
Sure.
and capture a lot of carbon dioxide, but they're also sort of the bottom of the food chain. So you get a little creature that eats that, and a larger one, and then finally to the fish that we might consume. But because of warming oceans, the oceans are becoming stratified. So the nutrients that typically come up to the phytoplankton aren't getting there. And parts of the world, like the Indian Ocean, they declined about 20%. So that's the basis of the food chain in the ocean.
And help me to understand a little bit more. So I understand that like salinization in the water and temperature, the combination of those two things profoundly affects everything else, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the oceans.
Hey, tell me about the shellfish/mollusk phenomenon that's going on.
Well, because the oceans are becoming more acidic, anything that needs a shell has to have the right pH, the right acidity, and that's changing.
Because of the factors that I just
Right.
mentioned moments
And
ago.
the one story I often share
The
is
oyster.
Oyster, yeah,
Yeah.
is somewhere on the West Coast. We have oyster farms. Well, those oyster farms start with little tiny oysters from a commercial facility, and those big tanks at this commercial facility growing the small oysters, all of a sudden they everything seemed to come to a halt. The young oysters didn't succeed. And they realized they were using ocean water, which was too acidic. So because they could control it, they changed the pH in the big tanks. Things were okay. So then they could get the babies out there and so on, get them started.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another big challenge.
And that's costly.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right. You know, it's much different than harvesting oysters, where
Right,
you know
right.
they are and you know how to get them.
Yep.
And that, you know, because that, you know, from an operational standpoint, has never changed.
Here's another really intriguing story. It's pollock that are harvested in the Bering Sea. It's worth about $1 billion a year to the U.S. fleet.
Yeah.
But the young pollock feed on the underside of ice, on the algae.
Huh?
Well, the ice is retreating.
Oh. And pollock is a major fish, right?
Yeah.
If you get imitation crab meat, it's pollock.
Yeah.
Right? If you get whitefish, you know what I mean?
Well, fillets and fish
Yeah.
sticks.
Absolutely. Right. Exactly.
No.
Yeah.
And the interesting part is here's moving food around. They harvest. Those pollock are shipped to China, processed, and then imported into the U.S.
That's the way we do things. Hey, I have a question from a viewer who asks, I'm curious about this one, a little bit out of left field, but it's a great question. Do you think that the nutritional value and quality of food has declined tremendously in the last 50 or 60 years based on just climate change alone? Okay, a few things going on there, but what do we know about the nutritional value of food and how
Well,
it's changing?
if you speak in really general terms,
Okay.
there's been an emphasis on yield and other things, not necessarily on the quality, nutritional quality of what we eat.
Oh.
And I think that's the direction. The change in nutritional quality based on climate change is something that'll happen in the future. But here again, we have a lot of plant breeders around the world who can strive to keep those crops nutritious for us.
Yeah. Let's shift a little bit. Supply chain. That's something that was brought into stark relief over the last couple of years, certainly 3 years ago. But this has always been kind of a challenge. But now the environment presents us with unique challenges that are really nasty and appear to be difficult to overcome. What are we talking about?
Well, there's a ship in the Panama Canal, and that region of the planet has been experiencing a long-term drought. So simply put, there's not enough water for the big ships to make it through the canal.
And there's a high volume of
Yeah, I mean, there's millions of
food that
tons
goes
of
through
produce and all kinds of other stuff that go through the canal. So they're challenged. There's other things. There's actually, like everywhere else, severe downpours at times, and it floods. It actually puts too much in the canal, too much water. So it's either one or the other, too much water or not
Yeah.
enough water.
Right.
So that's one example. Another would be the Mississippi River, which last fall faced this drought. I mean, it was incredible. The river, very little water, so the barges couldn't move. And that's the time of the year when the Midwest and the Great Plains are harvesting grain for export. So they had to find other ways to get it out, truck, et cetera, or store it, which is expensive. And but right now, the Mississippi is at flood stage because of all the melting snow at the northern ends of the river.
Right.
And that means the barges can't get under the bridges.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you need to depend on some things in order to make this whole thing work.
Right.
And to have a riverbed either be dry or
Yep.
overflowing is just too much.
Yep.
What else?
And then this one, the sea ice, the summer sea ice in the Arctic is retreating. If you look at the yellow line, that's essentially where it should be, but because things are warming, that ice retreats every summer. And then you've got something like 500,000 square miles of blue ocean that's absorbing sunlight and warming it, et cetera, and melting more ice. But on the positive side, when that's open, you can actually move product from northern Asia by ship to northern Europe with 40% less time.
That's right. So you can see you make your way around Alaska there, and then you
Right.
head over toward what is the large Hudson Bay over there on the right.
Yep.
And you've got a new North Passage.
Exactly. And there's also in the lower or the right is Greenland, which of course is like the Arctic, going through some serious melt of ice.
A good portion of the book discusses a survey that you had issued a little bit some time ago. It was a couple of years, I think. And what were you asking? What were you looking for in the survey? What were you hoping to find out? Was there a hypothesis you were testing, or you were just what drove this, and what kind of results did you?
Well,
come up with?
the main question was if people hear a climate change story that's standard, like glaciers are melting, more extreme weather.
Our doomsday scenario in the beginning of
Yeah,
our
or
talk.
versus climate change is going to affect your coffee and your chocolate, your vanilla, et cetera.
Yeah.
You know, would people act differentially? So the same set of questions, 500 people got one introductory comment or paragraph, the other got the other about food. Well,
To learn what motivates people.
yeah, well, it turns out we didn't find any difference. But there are a lot of sort of deeper questions that we ask, and a couple had to do with just how concerned are you about climate change impacts on food choices? Everybody cares. And what was interesting, it crossed the political divide. The same with, would you pay more for food grown with climate-friendly practices? Same thing. Political divide disappears, more or less.
Huh.
And do you want to know more about how climate change is affecting your food? Same thing. So if you asked, and we did in our survey, is climate change a crisis? The political divide just jumped out. But
Yeah.
not when you talk about food. So I think, this might be hopefully an approach that we can use to help, because climate change is so politicized in the U.S.
And ultimately, that's the objective here. We were talking about
Right.
this before we got started, which is, several people in the audience wanted to know how to have productive conversations about this, to persuade others that this is an issue, this is something you should care about. And ultimately, this translates to our elected officials having the political will to actually make change, and maybe food is one of the ways we can get there.
No, I mean, that's sort of where this story is taking us. It's, can we get enough people concerned about food and keeping it on the menu? But by doing that, coincidentally, you're also keeping the planet livable, but bring about the social change we need, extensively. And also the part about, as I started out, we've got limited amount of time. We have to act at scale and quickly. Well, we all eat every day. So is this the mechanism we can bring about? Frankly, I mean, we even talk about, climate change social movement driven by food. So if all of us, those in the business of food, the consumers, the restaurateurs, the chefs, start telling the story, can we make a difference?
Every few years, 5 years, the Farm Bill comes out.
Yep.
Is that true? What do those look like? I haven't checked out the last one. The last one I saw was 10 years ago, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information. Honestly, I'm not following that close enough to give you a good answer.
I know I threw a curveball, but
no, that's okay. That's okay.
But I'm
But it
curious.
is important.
But it does things like, presumably, ideally, address issues.
Right.
Because it's concerned with farming.
Yeah.
Right. And supply and
Right.
having America be a viable agricultural
Right.
nation.
Well, let's just pick up on farmers.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of solutions out there.
Okay.
And it's you and I, and it's it's everybody.
Yeah.
But let's look what farmers are doing. And one thing is their soil, is fundamental to their existence.
Yep.
So what's pictured here is a healthy soil, and it's amazing. Like in one handful, you can have 5 billion bacteria in a healthy soil, and a lot of other stuff. I mean, there's even studies that show that when there's a drought, plants will specifically recruit certain bacteria to help them get through the drought. I mean, that's just kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So, but farmers are doing their thing. First on the list is soil health. They're using technologies like GPS so they can cross a field efficiently and plant or fertilize, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Looking at improved water management. You got too much, you got enough.
Yeah.
I mentioned almonds and precision irrigation. I mean, there's just some really cool technologies where basically you can tell a vine in a field how's it doing, by inserting a little chip in it.
Yeah, we did a thing on precision viticulture or something
Yep.
recently. The amount of diagnostic equipment and technology that they have available that is relatively affordable, right? You shoot a drone shot, you get an idea of
Right.
how many weeds are in the vineyard, how much water is going on, all that stuff, right?
Right. Well, it's like flying over a field
Yeah.
or assessing a field for what's the fertility in that field.
Yes.
So then as you pass with the GPS technology, this part needs more fertilizer, this needs less. So it's constantly adjusting to the soil's needs.
Yeah.
So again, farmers are really focused on, number one, soil health. But food industries, I heard a talk by one of the major wineries recently, they're reducing the weight of a bottle of wine, the glass.
Sure.
Well, think of the millions of bottles, and if you just change it a little bit,
I know.
it's a huge change.
Right.
But So the food businesses, you know, you hear major companies are investing in, they're looking at their supply chain. So where are they sourcing this product? Well, they'd better be investing in that farmer, because if without that farmer growing cacao in Western Africa, you're not going to have chocolate. At least from that, the cacao is going to be under stress.
Yeah.
Look at the whole supply chain, doing things like that.
Yeah.
But what's pictured here is a really cool one, because this is a beer made in the UK out of waste bread.
Video producer Kyle loves beer.
Yeah?
His ears just perked up when you said this.
No, I
What's it do?
don't. We can't get it in the U.S., but
What is this?
it's
What's it made out of?
bread,
Just bread.
just bread.
And the sugars contained within.
Yeah.
Like the beer.
No, and I don't. It's a phenomenal number of slices of bread a day that are
Yeah.
captured and used to make. But it's also staying in business. You know, wine and distilleries, wineries and distilleries are not using water to clean some of their equipment. They're using like ultraviolet light, et cetera.
Oh.
You know, it saves enormous.
Sure.
And they're purchasing solar power like everyone. You know, there's also vineyards in California where they're using goats to keep all the
Yeah.
grasslands down so they don't burn.
Yeah, they used. Yeah.
You know, I mean, so they're, put it this way, every time I go to a farm, I come back off that farm having learned something.
Yeah.
If they're on the land, that's what they need to do. And finally, you know, scientists, I mentioned this already, but around the world there are tens of thousands of scientists, you know, developing new varieties, developing models that can predict what's going to be like next year, so farmers know what to do. Those in the business of food know what to do, et cetera. And to me, it's also an incredible opportunity to convey the value of science through food.
Yeah.
You know, you want that potato on your plate? Well, there's a scientist that's developed a new variety that's going to keep it there because of any number of issues associated with climate change. And also, I'm often asked, well, what about genetically engineered crops?
Yes.
It's part of the portfolio.
Yeah.
And the National Academy of Sciences pretty much clearly states when it comes to human consumption, they're safe, period. That's, you know, the data are there.
I'm going to move on. I have a couple cool questions
Sure.
from viewers, which I love. ADP checks in and says, what are your thoughts about hydroponics? I hadn't thought about it. How does
Sure.
that fit into the picture here?
Well, actually, there's more and more investments in, we'll call it controlled environment agriculture, greenhouses or hydroponics.
Okay.
So we ought to look at all of those.
Yeah.
You know, some of the greenhouse production it's still heavy on the greenhouse gas emissions because it takes a lot of energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like we need everything. So
Yeah.
hydroponics, whatever, let's do it. And there's just also these container farms, like you know, containers on a ship.
Yes.
They basically completely pack the inside with plants, special lighting, and that container, I don't know, it can produce like 2 acres worth of food.
Wow.
Because the lighting is
Yeah.
constant, pest pressure is managed, et cetera.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, sure.
A lot of cool innovation in that. You know, I learned a little bit about digital agriculture, same
Right.
sort of deal. Because the greenhouse allows for really optimal data collection,
Exactly.
energy management. It's really impressive stuff. Chelsea checks in and asks, what are your thoughts on, it was Joyce. Is vertical farming climate water usage friendly? Tell us about vertical farming as far as you understand it.
Well, it's basically taking a structure or building a structure, multiple stories, and growing food in it. Here again, lots of positives.
Okay.
But typically what's being grown now are high-value crops, like little, you know, alfalfa sprouts, that sort of thing, because it's
yeah.
expensive. So you've got to grow a crop that you can make a living at doing that. The thing currently with that kind of production is, again, greenhouse gas emissions, because they're pretty energy intensive.
Yeah, sure.
But other than that, you know, let's keep there's a lot of science, a lot of research going on to bring those costs down.
Perfect. Thanks for the questions there. Let's get, so we're in our last 15 minutes here. People are wondering about prescriptions, how to behave, what to do going forward. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you address in the book here as far as recommending behaviors? How do we change things? I know there's a lot in this question, but
Yeah, changing behaviors is not easy.
yeah,
We're all entrenched.
yeah,
So first and foremost, the story of the book is we're using the power of food to help people truly become aware of the climate change challenge. So that's sort of informing them, making them aware.
Does a very good job, yeah.
And if you like those foods, which we all do, you got to do something. So that's sort of the leverage point. And so on an individual basis, you know, let's say at home, for example, again, diet is important. Plant-based diet is a right step. And just on that topic, I'm often asked, well, what about local growing?
Oh, yeah.
And people think
I'm
that's...
glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, and my response is, it's not where it's grown. It's not where it's from, it's what you eat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's back to the meat question. It's better to reduce that. Local grown, great. Great for local farmers, all that stuff in the community.
Yeah.
But bear in mind, if you're still having steaks, you're not helping. But also food, in our survey, we learned that, and not surprisingly, most people talk about food. But they don't, other surveys show that they don't talk about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Yet,
Yeah.
Catherine Hayhoe, sort of the guru of climate change communication, says the first step in addressing climate change is to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, the next time you're gathering with a bottle of wine, give it a try.
Yeah.
Start talking about it.
Yep.
That's absolutely key. And then, you know, the other thing about climate change is whatever you do has to matter. We all feel good about recycling, taking it out to the curb, you know, in the states where they have it. But we've got to go deeper, like look at where your money's invested in your retirement funds, things like that. Getting involved, joining with others in groups, and this seems to fit my age class, but I'm part of 3 different groups of elders. Mm-hmm. Bill McKibben has one, Cornell has one, and then there's actually one called Elders for Climate Action.
Uh-huh.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, team up with your peers, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that also helps with the anxiety because you're actually doing something.
That's right.
So it's really key to think, what am I doing? So getting involved, and I think it's pretty obvious. It's a politicized topic in the U.S., so, you know, do what you need to do.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme, right? The science, the engineering, all of that's rock solid. It's the political will to actually
Right. It's, yeah,
change in the
it's
end. Yeah.
And just one of the these elder groups, actually, one of the things they did recently was protested in front of banks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was an act, you know.
Yeah.
So all these, gray-haired people were out there with their signs, and
Yeah.
because they were trying to help make it aware that some banks are investing in the wrong things today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to call back to the supply chain
Sure.
snags and critical problems that we have. Praveen checks in and asks, what stage of the food supply chain is the most critical to tackle first? Farming, manufacturing, retail, food service, delivery, you know, that kind of stuff.
I think the source, farming.
Really?
I mean, it's
Yeah.
the most challenged.
I guess the most critical to tackle first was the question.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't grow it,
Right.
kind of the end of the story. You don't worry about storage or transportation. So I would
Sure.
say that's definitely at the top of the
That's
list.
where the greatest challenges lie,
right. And
despite the
risk,
opportunities.
the greatest risk.
and the greatest risk.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. A Slido viewer. Oh, somebody notes how drought affected Texas peaches last year is that they were smaller than usual, increasingly sweeter than usual due to less water content. Mixed bag there. Obviously, nothing better than peaches in the summer.
Right.
What's going on in some of this in the fruit industries in the U.S.? Are they particularly challenged beyond peaches, like oranges? Huge crop, you know, all across the South, specifically Florida.
Well, the last hurricane that hit
responding?
Florida
Did that do
knocked a lot of oranges off the trees
Yeah,
and the blossoms,
yeah,
which meant the bees didn't have anything to pollinate.
yeah.
So it was, I mean, I saw images of just, orange fields. The ground is pretty much orange.
And there was a freeze from the year before, I think.
Yeah.
They had,
But before we started this, I also mentioned in New York, out west, the grapes have already blossoming, and it's a month early.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something called fall spring.
Yes.
So that's great. But now, if winter comes back, that will really wipe out, really do a lot of damage to the grape crop.
Yeah, we were talking about that. Well, not, you and I were talking about it, but France and Spain are thinking about that a lot.
Yep.
Right, and even domestic grape growers here. All right, Mike, give us some positive developments. You had indicated that more people are eco-anxious. Great. Any other positive developments from where you sit as it relates to food supply, people's behaviors? Anything?
There's actually a lot. I mean,
You're
if
encouraged,
if
right?
you look at some of the legislation in the U.S., what's called the Inflation Reduction Act,
Yep.
everybody should make themselves aware of opportunities there for installation of geothermal, for solar, et cetera. The incentives are just really there. Just for the record, I put in geothermal last year prior to the incentive, but it's okay. I mean, that's one thing. I just keep encouraging people to investigate for their own, investment in their house, or even companies can do that. Solar is really taking on in the U.S. Wind is taking on, but when it comes to food, just the interest in this story about using food to help people understand climate change is really taking off. I don't know. I've given 100 plus, maybe close to 200 now talks on this topic.
Yeah.
And it's well received. Another podcast just came out that I did with a group out of Florida. It was basically, the title was something like "How Climate Change Will Affect Your Favorite Foods in Florida,"
Yeah.
like the Cuban sandwich
Oh,
and
yeah.
this special rum drink.
Sure.
But I mean, it's just,
Yep.
you got to make it relative
Yeah.
where people are. So I think from this effort has real potential. So I'm excited about it. And we're just going to keep pushing. We're actually getting close to sort of locking in a documentary film,
Oh, great.
which would be
Good luck. Keep me posted.
really cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you can imagine just visualizing
Yeah.
this story, whether it's blueberries in Peru or whatever, but
Yeah.
that depend on ice melt from above, which of course the ice is still melting.
Yeah.
I don't mean to make fun of it at all, but there's stories to tell to get people to do something and act. So, I think it's coming together, this idea of social change and social movement. There's some potential there.
What does your course cover as it relates to this? I know that there's a social governance component to it. Your course is called Climate Change Leadership. Who is that for?
It was actually designed for food companies initially.
Okay.
But it's actually much broader. It's for organizations. And the first part of the course is the basics, what's happening, so on and so forth. But then it goes into things like packaging. How can you improve your packaging as an organization?
Sure.
How can you change the culture in an organization such that everybody becomes a participant
Yes.
in working on striving for taking us in the right direction.
Yeah.
But it's incredible because there are just people from all over the world that take that course. And I think the students learn as much from each other as they do from the course, and just hearing other stories and challenges they face, but also what people are actually doing.
Yeah, yeah. That's one great thing about the course is that there's a cohort of students
Right.
that are international, and
Exactly.
people learn so many things about what's going on in other
Yep.
parts of the world. Hey, I want to plug something real quick, if you don't mind. Tomorrow we're doing a podcast recording, a keynote that's going to take place at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, called Demystifying Funky, Trendy Natural Wines. Maybe you can tune
I
in.
think I'll be there.
Yeah, would you please? I'm going to be joined by Professor Cheryl Stanley from the School of Hotel Administration. She's a wine expert. She and I are going to go for it and taste some funky natural wines. We're going to do some orange wines, Pet Nat wines, some Beaujolais even. So it'll be fun. Join us for our virtual tasting tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll share the URL with you right there. And in addition, please, should share the course URL for your climate change leadership. Mike, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for
Likewise.
coming in today and talking about our changing menu. I'm really enjoying the book. I encourage everybody else to check it out because I'm just getting liftoff and I love it.
Okay, good to hear.
Well done. Thanks for
All
joining
right,
us today.
thank you.
And viewers, thank you so much. Everyone stay strong, stay safe, and we hope that you'll join us for the next keynote soon. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.